Montessorians of the world. I am Carol Palmer. I'm a Montessori teacher in New Zealand, and I'm here with Richard Goodyear, who's also a Montessorian of New Zealand. He's my friend, colleague, partner in crime, mentor.
Yeah.
We've been friends for about 8 years now.
Yeah.
We both started here together. We are in Wāora Montessori School. We've set up a picnic, even though it's a little bit on the chilly side, because we are trying to claim the last bits of summer, and we are going to show you some of the traditional Kiwi picnic food, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Richard and his experience of Montessori. Hi Richard.
G'day. How's it going?
Yeah, good, nice to see you. Do you want to tell us about some of this food that we've got here?
Yeah, sure. So let's just run through what we've got here. Most of it is food we don't actually like very much, but it's just like traditional New Zealand food. So we have lamingtons, which are sponge, covered in something sticky. Is it icing?
I think
It's not really
I think
icing,
that's jelly or jello in American terms, and that's chocolate icing.
And then rolled in coconut. And when I was a kid and I'd see these at picnics, I would go, gross. And I still think that a little bit. But they're okay. They're pretty good, actually.
But are they traditionally like old sponge that you're trying to make look fresh again?
No, I think you actually made a sponge for lamingtons. Yeah. Sad but true. Okay, here we have white bread, high nutrition value, filled with Vegemite. Okay, let's just open one up here. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, so this is something, Vegemite is something I absolutely love.
Do you? So this was my question, Vegemite or Marmite?
Oh, Vegemite. All day long.
And then when it's Marmite, there's Kiwi Marmite and there's English Marmite.
Oh, English Marmite. We're not even going to start on that.
So English Marmite is the only mite.
We won't go there. So Vegemite.
Kiwi.
Yeah. Marmite, I think, is the New Zealand one, and Vegemite is actually Australian.
Yeah, but Marmite calls itself Marmite, and the real one is English Marmite, which Kiwis call My Mate. But that could be a whole hour-long interview of its own.
Yeah, we weren't going to mention the English Marmite, okay? We agreed on that. So Vegemite, though, if it's Australian or New Zealand, I don't really know or care, but it is just the best sort of umami, sticky sort of flavour, perfect on toast. I literally have this every morning.
But with butter?
Not on white bread, though. Yeah, Vogel's toast, which is a whole other thing, and butter.
We could have just done a whole set on New Zealand food.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're starting with stuff we don't even like that much. Imagine if we had stuff we do like. But yeah, Vegemite is delicious, and I have that every day. So I will probably eat this, even though it's kind of white bread, which is a bit, not my favourite. Okay, pineapple lumps though. So Carol and I disagree about these. These are the best. These are literally one of the best lollies you can get. Sweets, lollies, sweets.
Yeah, candy.
Candy. Yeah, I love that word. Candy.
And we can't fully disagree because I have actually never even tried one. I can't even bring myself to eat one. This is like pineapple flavoured foam.
Yeah, marshmallow-esque
coated in brown stuff
foam.
that they call chocolate.
Not very high quality chocolate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be really good if you put them in the freezer, which I haven't.
Yeah, that's true. I'm not a big fan of really, really cold things. I'm not a big fan of ice cream, but it's just something about pineapple lumps. Probably, again, because I had them as a kid, and you just kind of end up loving them. You don't want to analyse these things too much. Now that you start describing what it actually is, I'm like...
You're never going to eat them again.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
the big thing about pineapple lumps, though, is if you leave them too long, or maybe if you haven't left them long enough, they go really hard. Probably too long. You know, in the 70s and the early 80s, candy, sweets, lollies weren't actually that common. I mean, it was quite a treat to have.
So you looked after them.
Yeah, and so if you came to someone's birthday party and the pineapple lumps were too hard, it was like,
going home.
Yep, that's it. Okay, Anzac biscuits.
Yeah.
Tell us about Anzac biscuits.
Well, so you brought these that someone baked for you, right? So it was Anzac Day a couple of days ago. So that's the Australia and New Zealand Army. And as far as I know, these are what were traditionally packed for soldiers to carry. And these I will eat. I actually do really like these.
Really good.
Yeah.
And these are nice ones. And I think they've got a bit of chocolate in them, which is non-traditional. But yeah, they're effectively...
pumpkin seeds, they're not traditional, but they're good.
Yeah, they are... I think they're gluten-free, these ones.
All right.
Yeah.
They're like hardtack, aren't they? They keep for a really long time. That's why they would... And they're full of sugar and energy and stuff.
Right. It's the same sort of thing you take hiking, tramping. And Anzac Day is a tradition in New Zealand and Australia commemorating the First World War. Our soldiers fighting together, particularly with the Australians. It's a bit controversial. I'm not a fan. I don't think we really need to be celebrating the First World War anymore. But again, that's not really the subject of this.
We don't agree on that
interview.
either, but that again, we could do that.
Yeah, we could have a conversation about that. And I mean, I say celebrating, but it's not really about that. But anyway, yeah, we'll save that for another day. But they are delicious biscuits. So that's the main thing.
Okay,
So that's good. And then
the LMP.
lastly, we have LMP. So little town called Paeroa, which is up north. Mineral water. High quality mineral water, very clean. Someone decided to set up a company in this little town making this fizzy drink, God knows when, maybe in the 60s. So lemon and Paeroa is the drink, just called LMP.
So Paeroa is not an ingredient?
No, Paeroa is a place. Yeah. And basically it's just lemony drink really. It's got a bit of a slightly malty flavour though. It's actually really good.
Let's try them.
But I think it's just made by Coke now, honestly.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I wish you hadn't said that last bit. I liked it until then.
Sorry about that.
And I don't think I've ever tried. I'm not really like a Coke Fanta fizzy drink fan.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I've even ever tried this, but I have always known it as the traditional Kiwi. That would do it. Might not be very nice.
Yeah. It's pretty good stuff. Thank you. I'll just get the lid on. But of course, again, when I was a kid, this came in glass bottles and straws. And now, big trashy plastic bottle.
It's quite nice.
Yeah, it's good, eh?
It's not as sweet as all the other sodas. Oh.
Yeah. I might be lying about the Coke connection, but it's probably made by some big corporate.
I'm going to have to hold it. Cool. All right, so this is where we are. So Waiora Montessori School is on the south of the North Island of New Zealand. It goes all the way from babies to 18. And Richard and I first started here in the 9 to 12 class at the same time when I didn't know very much about Montessori at all, and Richard was my co-teacher, mentor, showed me how to use the beads and such before I began my training.
Wow. Back when you really, really were fresh to Montessori. That seems like a long time ago now.
And we lasted a whole 6 months together before I had to move into another class because we lost a teacher. That's a whole different story, but that was a great time. And then you moved, how long were you in 9 to 12 before you moved to adolescence?
3 years, one full cycle of the kids in the class. Yeah.
So actually, let's track back to before that time. How did you get into Montessori?
Yeah, so I think that my Montessori journey really starts with the fact that I became a parent very young.
I think that's a lot of people's story.
Yeah. And so I didn't have a job or a trajectory or a career path or anything like that at that point. And my partner at the time, she's still my partner. What am I saying?
She was your partner at the time.
She was my partner at the time. My partner, my wife, now wife, was pretty busy having this baby. And so there was this thought that someone should probably get a job. And there was this other thought that was, you should probably do that because I'm growing this baby. And that seemed to make a lot of sense. Yeah, and my mother rang me and she said, Richard, you make a really good teacher. And I just laughed. I just scoffed at the whole notion of me being a teacher. I mean, my last experience at school had been my high school, only about 3 or 4 years before that, where I was literally just going there to see my friends, And my primary school years were just so far in the distance at that point that all I could remember was grumpy teachers and maybe the odd one I liked. And just the whole idea of school just seemed so, I think it was that it seemed very institutional and very sort of traditional. And I was young and a bit artistic and I wanted to be in the theatre and work in restaurants and all just kind of have a glamorous life. And so the idea of being a teacher just seemed very boring. But it kind of gnawed away at me. And my mother, as she does, had just planted this seed. And so really it came down to I couldn't really think of any good reasons to not do it. So I applied and got in, and that was me, into Teachers College. Now, right from, even before I got into the college actually, that's right, we had to do a visit to a school.
Yeah.
And I, all that time before I'd even started, thought to myself, if I'm going to be a teacher, I want to do something alternative, something different. And I'd heard of Montessori. And that's all. It was literally just a word.
Oh, so right at the start, you knew Montessori was going to be a thing.
Yeah. And so we had for our application, we had to do a visit to a primary school. Well, I came here.
Ah,
I didn't know that. Yeah, in 1995. So before Jan was the principal.
Was there anyone here that was there when you worked here?
Possibly, or Donna would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, Donna would have been.
So that's the administration, the finance lady who's been a stalwart of the school forever, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think probably only Donna, but I don't remember anyone other than the principal, who was a guy who I don't think was here for very long. Anyway, I don't remember what I saw. I don't remember thinking it was very amazing or anything. It was just a school. But anyway, obviously at that point, I was kind of thinking Montessori, because it's different, might be for me. So anyway, fast forward, go to Teachers College, had all my worst fears and prejudices affirmed.
Oh, it was like the education system.
Yeah. So I did my first teacher placement, 6 weeks into my first year, and I hated it. It was terrible. I loved the kids. I quite liked the school as a place to be. It was, it had a playground, it had playing fields, it had a swimming pool. People were reasonably nice. But the education that was going on in the classroom was just wrong. There was lots of shouting. There was lots of belittling of the kids.
Kind of teachers shouting.
Yeah. And we had, because it was our first teaching experience of 6, that we were just to observe. Didn't really do a lot of lessons. So I did a lot of observing, and one day I saw the teacher really berate this girl, and I tracked that. I wrote down copious notes about that, and about how much of a ripple effect it had on this kid for 10, 20, 30 minutes, and how she eventually kind of came right and got on with her day. But I just thought this was terrible. You're shouting at this little person, and they are embarrassed and ashamed and unmotivated, and supposedly this is all in the name of maintaining order, and maintaining the teacher-student relationship as one of power, and that's needed. That was needed, supposedly. So, that was a thing, and but I survived Teachers College and did do a Montessori placement as part of that with Robin Wilkins at Otari. I met Belinda.
Who's a teacher here, as is Robin, who set up a lot of stuff in Montessori in New Zealand, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Maybe we'll interview her next time.
Yes, you should. She's a gem. And so I had convinced the Teachers College people to let me go and do a placement in Montessori. So anyway, did that. So I kind of kept this little thread going, but really there was no hope because there's no schools, virtually no schools in New Zealand at that point. And so I went out to the mainstream and got a job at Berhampore School in South Wellington. And as I was doing the little tour around the school, Mark Potter, the principal, said, "Oh, by the way, there's a bunch of stuff happening in our school over the next year or two. We've got a new computer suite starting, we've got a new playing field, there's a Montessori unit starting." So that was amazing. So I didn't have a job in it, but I was working alongside the Montessori person at that time, who was Jan Gaffney.
So you were teaching the mainstream class, but there was a Montessori wing, so that's where you were kind of trying to shunt your way across.
I would at that stage there was no way I could go and work in it, but I would go and hang out in it, and the thing that I remember was just the kids were just so peaceful, and they just seemed to be so much more confident and just enjoying themselves, and the class was quiet and people were concentrating, and it was a complete contrast to my classroom, which was chaotic and a lot of fun at times, but quite chaotic and not very orderly and not very purposeful.
And you were sure that was the philosophy, not the teacher?
Bit of a combo, I'd say. But the funny thing was, not funny, it's actually kind of sad, but about a year or 18 months into that role, so Montessori up the other end of the school, just this kind of random thing happening up there. Really my main thing was my own classroom, and I had become that shouty teacher that I observed in my first teaching experience. and I just did not like the teacher that I was becoming. And so anyway, I left that school after a couple of years, went to London, continued to be a shouting teacher in London. I mean, they specialise in it in England, don't they? In fact, the whole sort of controlling the children thing was really put on show for me there, where you literally had a clipboard with the children's names down one side, 30 slots across the top, and if they did something good, you'd give them a tick, and if they did something bad, you'd scrub it off. And on the last session of the week, for half an hour, we would have golden time.
Yeah.
And that's all week we were trying to ease these kids towards golden time and use it as this big carrot.
I wonder if that's still a thing, because that was a while ago now, right?
Yeah.
10 years ago.
That was 2002. Yeah. So.
More than 10 years ago.
Oh,
then.
yeah. Closer to 20, shivers. So anyway, that was, that just again affirmed to me that mainstream teaching just wasn't for me. But I needed a job, because if you go back to the start of the story, I was supposedly earning money so we could have this young family. And
which you must have had by then.
Yeah, that's right.
And
so in
another
fact, we had Ned at that point as well. So we had two, and in fact, Joe was thinking about going back to work as well. But still, he had a mortgage and need a job. So when it was time to come back to New Zealand, I looked at the ads in the Gazette, and they just the way that teaching jobs are described. It was just like, no. You had to be a maths strategy specialist or an ICT specialist, or this initiative that had come about since I'd left the country, and no. It's just like, no. So I rang my old boss at the school that had the Montessori unit. Not that I was thinking Montessori really, but he said, I don't really have anything at the moment except for something in the Montessori unit.
If you want to join that weird philosophy on the other side of school.
So that was when I got my first job, and got my first round of training, and so that's what led me to actually a job in Montessori. Mm-hmm. But the Montessori journey, of course, just begins then.
And you were 9 to 12 there, right?
Yeah. And it just changed everything. It changed the way I think. It changed my worldview. It changed certainly my teaching. And it gave me, I think the biggest thing is that it gave me permission to actually just interact with children constructively and in a fun way, and just enjoy my job. And I think if there's a message from Montessori for all educational models, it's do that.
Well,
if nothing else, at least do that.
When I first came here and I was like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing with these kids because I knew nothing about Montessori, and you said, just enjoy and love the children. I was like, we're allowed to love the children. We're allowed to say that we love the children and show that to them. That's cool.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, I think that thread has stuck with me all the way through to where I am now. So I mean, that's how I got into it, it all just sort of rippled from there and changed and developed and morphed, and I don't know. I mean, I could keep going on. Shall I tell you about where I went next? Okay, cool. So I was at that school as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wait,
so I was at that
training
school.
at that time? Talk about that.
Yep. So I was at that school until I came and met you.
Yeah.
So, right. So what I did is, just coincidentally, there was a school in Christchurch, Nova Montessori, who was effectively setting up a training program for one teacher, because they had this new teacher to the school, and the two people who ran that school, so Phil Gang and Marcia Snow.
They are quite well known in Montessori, right?
Yeah.
Their names were recognised because didn't they make the timelines?
No. Oh, it may have an input. They have been around for a long time. Marcia's not with us anymore. She died 2 or 3 years ago, I believe. Their thing is that they called it radical Montessori. They've gone away from the kind of classic AMI model. They were AMI trained, and then Phil, I believe, had become a trainer of trainers, and but had moved away. He had decided that it was too rigid, and that we needed a new way of envisioning Montessori education.
So that's another whole Indian discussion, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And again, I'm totally with them. And so they really wanted to get to the heart of cosmic education and really ask how does that look in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. So they actually they dispensed with the timelines actually and created these story ropes.
Oh, right.
So they would have these 10-metre long black ropes that they could put in a big coil or shape them any way they wanted, and they put certain things down. Their thing was that the information is changing all the time, and so if you've got this static timeline, you're stuck. And so their view is that let's keep it dynamic, let's keep it open. So that was cool. And
so that's with every subject, or all of the core timelines that we use for
all
schools?
of the core timelines.
Yeah, and then you put the pieces on so that you can figure them out. That's quite cool.
And you can change the scale. In fact, you only need one story rope because you just change the scale all the time.
I think I saw you do that with light. I think you did a story of light one time when we had a sleepover.
Oh, nice.
I feel like we need to start a podcast. There are so many more things
Yeah,
let's
do that. I know. There's a lot, isn't there? When you start scratching away at the surface. And so they ended up running a Montessori course for anyone who was interested. And so a bunch of people, so I believe Robin was there, Demetra Montazis was there, Jan Gaffney was there, and I was there. And it just happened to be starting around the same time that I was joining that new school. So I did that on weekends and school holidays for about 18 months. And they delivered the equivalent of one of those shorter courses like what AMS might do, sort of an academic summer rather than a year. So it was about 45 days or something like that. So that got me started, and I got a bunch of albums, but they were all kind of like pre-printed. You just printed off the PDF. In fact, I think they printed them for us anyway. So there was always acknowledged that this was not the ideal, but this was a way to get you started. So I came back to Wellington, did all that, and then just developed this classroom culture, I suppose, over about 10-year period or 12 years or whatever it was, and it was a culture very much based on big projects that kids would do, and then of course all of the key components of cosmic education were there. But I look back and there's no way I was delivering the classic Montessori curriculum.
But was your classroom like that calm, engaged classroom that you observed to begin with, not the shouty one?
Yes.
Absolutely. So you were achieving what you aimed to, just not like your highest Montessori self.
That's right. But I've come to realise that was my highest Montessori self anyway. So over the years, I've kind of gone through lots of ups and downs about what I should do at any given moment with the Montessori children I have in front of me. And I've come to the conclusion that the most important thing is the atmosphere in the room and the relationships that happen between the students and the teacher. And when you pare it right back down to that, then really the Montessori lessons that we deliver and the frameworks that we work within are just a means to an end. I think that probably the cosmic awareness would be the thing that would be the true melting of what I have come to enjoy about working with them, and what is the classic sort of Montessori aim, is that idea of interconnectedness, of the ripple effect, of the fact that we are part of a bigger context. All of those big ideas in Montessori, they've always been part of what I've tried to do with the kids. But could they tell you parts of a leaf? Could they all square root? Do they pass sentences to a university grammar level? Well, if they were interested.
Yeah, and do they know how to find out the parts of a leaf?
Exactly. Yeah. And in fact the way children access information now has changed so much in that time anyway. So that whole thing becomes another conversation again.
Put that on the podcast.
Put it down there. I actually was working with some adolescents the other day and talking about how maths isn't really that important, and don't freak out if you don't feel you're good at maths. And these were kids who hadn't actually come through Montessori, most of them, so they had come in with quite a negative attitude. And And I said, but there are some things that are really good to know. For instance, I bet you most adults don't know how to work out percentage on a calculator. And they agreed that they didn't know how to do that. And most adults that I talk to don't know how to do it. But we went, but I wonder what Google would say. And so we just literally spoke into Google, what is 62% of 175? And it just spoke the answer.
So they do know how to work it out.
So it's like, I don't know if that helped my cause or not, but anyway, it was good. So I was at that school for a number of years, but I had been there for a while when I realised that my training wasn't really adequate, actually, and that I was drifting a bit and just really doing, kind of a cute and cuddly version of Montessori with a few great lessons thrown in. So I petitioned to the people who funded it to send me on a formal course, and so we settled on one that another teacher had done there at that school, Tanya Gaffney, who's here now.
It's a very small world in New Zealand, right? Montessori in New Zealand is very, very small. We pretty much all know each other.
We do, yeah, it's a bit scary at
Which
times.
is actually a negative to kind of the growth of the pedagogy, because, how many teachers were doing Montessori in your school at the time? 2? Yeah, so there's not many people around you to bring in new ideas and support, and if you don't know what you're doing, it's kind of tough.
Yeah. And you can get a bit fixed into one way of doing things that becomes the New Zealand sort of Montessori way. But I don't think that's necessarily true, but there is perhaps a pressure there. So they sent me to New York. I really wanted to go to New York as well. And so I went there and studied at what's called Centre for Montessori Teacher Education, which is now morphed into something Metz. It's called METSI. I'm not sure the exact thing, but
and that was a one-off training all in one block.
So it was an American summer plus 2 3-day workshops, and then a whole lot of self-directed internship type stuff.
And that was 9 to 12 training.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and that just flipped my whole mind again, and it just was the most magnificent summer of my life, and loved the people, and just got so inspired into the work and the albums again, and the experiments and the demonstrations and the materials, and it was just the most perfect thing to be doing at that time. So that was about 2/3 of the way through my time at that school. So sadly, I didn't stay that much longer at the school, and they'd invested in me, and they only got me for 3 years, but that's just how life goes sometimes. But I certainly, those after the training, I had a good 2 or 3 years still going at that school. But the only thing is that it did set up a bit of a dilemma, in that I came back to the classroom and kind of went, really, if you want this kind of education to be really solid, you need to have an impact at leadership level of the school. Worst decision, worst realization of my life, because it sent me down this whole pathway. And I don't regret it, because it's got me where I am right now, and I love where I am right now. But it is, when you ask that question about what is the school management and leadership doing to support best practice in the classroom, whatever that philosophy is, then it is a bit of a can of worms, because you do end up with endless management meetings arguing your case, and kind of, I didn't feel that I had a lot of impact, but I put a lot of my heart and soul into it.
And is that because it wasn't a Montessori school? I think that's what the difference is, that you were trying to make the Montessori case in a school that, also had to meet the needs of a mainstream system.
Yeah. But a lot of the key elements of Montessori are applicable to environment. So I still didn't, it wasn't enough for me to know that we had this label over the door called Montessori. The rest of the school had a different label. To me, it was still, there's so much in terms of your relationships and I guess engagement, like kids actually doing purposeful, meaningful work, and not doing things for accountability reasons for the teacher, and then the teacher having to do things for accountability for management, and management for the board, and the board for the government. And so that kind of that linkage that goes all the way back up to what society's expectations for children are, it can be a bit of a path to madness depending on how you interpret it. And so I ended up in this kind of loop of meetings and initiatives and roll this out in your classroom because it's really important. And that's the bit that actually drove me a bit bananas. But I'm still firm that my role is to be asking those questions and to be working with professionals who want to make an impact for the teachers, so the teachers can make an impact for the students. And so that's how I've ended up kind of staying in that leadership trajectory.
Because the way you describe it, it made like the child sound, the smallest part of that whole equation.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
And that mindset, I think it is.
Yeah.
It is. Well, it's the factory model, isn't it? That's another thing I discovered. The realization was that effectively mainstream education is based on this idea of the factory, and it's a very appealing model.
It's a very easy model to follow.
Yes, yeah, and it's an easy model to imagine, and this idea that you take effectively a blank slate and you just add value, and as it goes through the chain, you just add more value, and in doing so, you're also acculturating this economic unit, ready for work. And but what I find so ironic is that the schools still really operate that way, but actually society is moving away from that more and more. And so even if we just look at what we do as preparing them for the world of work, if that was all we did, if that was the only thing we needed to worry about, then we'd still have it wrong.
Still not be doing it very well.
Whereas in Montessori, what we do is we prepare the child, the person. We help the person be unleashed, and if we do add any value, it's the awareness and the ability to answer questions and ask questions and expect answers and to express yourself. That's our value add, and the awareness of the bigger picture, the universe, but really in I think now that I work with adolescents, it's about people and society and community, but having that awareness that everything you do has an impact and everything you do is a product of something else.
You mean the child having that awareness, or you and your educator?
The child, So a child who's gone through a Montessori education hopefully will have that awareness that every single thing that they pick up and do has a story to it.
Yeah.
And to not take that for granted, and that everything they do has some sort of impact. And that's what the big stories tell us. And that's really, to me, their key role. Anyway, I guess I got a bit burnt out at that school, and that's when I came here, and that's when I met you.
Yeah.
And did the 3 years in the 9 to 12s, and then I think particularly because I wanted to carry on that leadership stuff, there was a job running the adolescent program here, and so that was one of the main reasons that I jumped up there. And
Richard's pointing that way because the adolescent program is up the road, slightly different site, a few metres up the way. But so you didn't actually change schools; you just moved campuses slightly with the same cohort of kids. There's a group of kids out there. This is nice.
That's good, eh? Yeah. Who had me for 3 years and then had me for another 3 years, and some of them really relished that opportunity and some ran screaming from the hilltops, but we're all good friends now, and I do joke with them, well I used to, that I would just follow them further up the school system, but I didn't do that. So I went up there, and I think I was up there for the best part of 5 years.
That sounds about right. That makes it 8,
yeah. And then, similar to you, Carol, been thinking big thoughts about, life in general, and so that's why Joe and I decided to move to London. And then COVID hit.
Yeah, so you're not in London. What happened there?
Yeah, a little pesky little virus, and so we had, we cancelled our trip.
So you'd resigned from here.
I'd resigned from here.
You were going over there to
just live it.
With your sack on your stick over your shoulder, just going to go and see what you could see.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nothing to do with Montessori, nothing to do with career, that stuff at all. It was really just about an extended working holiday. Now that the kids are grown up, because of course they entered the story way down there, now they're all in their 20s, all 2 of them. And and then COVID.
Scuppered that.
Yeah.
So you pivoted. And where do you live now?
So now, where do I live now? So I have a house.
Uh-huh.
I do have a house.
And do you live in the house?
I do not live in that house. My wife lives in that house. I live on a boat. So I bought a house in the Wairarapa, which for the viewers at home is not in Wellington, but is quite close to Wellington. It's about an hour's drive over a hill. Beautiful. So we bought a 10-acre olive grove with a bunch of other trees and ponds and various random things on it. But during that process, I got approached. After we didn't go to London, I started working for a school in Auckland.
Adolescent program.
Yeah.
High school.
Yeah. And they wanted some help with their humanities program, and it just turned out they needed a lot of help generally. And so I started working as a consultant. That was the pivot bit, was that now I'm an educational consultant. And so I set up that model really as just kind of living the dream, or trying to live the dream of, okay, I'm not working in a school now. I'd be quite happy if I didn't work full-time in a school for a while. But I love schools. I love working with students and teachers. And so how about I have a go at just helping schools, and maybe they might want to pay me some money.
And there is a lot of call for that because of this small school issue.
Yeah.
So because you've been in a few schools and you've been around Montessori schools, I think there is a call in New Zealand, probably around the world, for someone to come in with fresh eyes and just go, okay, well, this is what I'm observing, and have you thought about this, and just ask all those challenging questions, right?
Yeah.
That people within the school might just take for granted because it's been that way so long.
Yeah, that's it. And there seems to be that the common thread that I'm finding is in the adolescent work especially, but I think with 9 to 12 there are implications, because effectively, I don't even know if we've quite got the planes of development thing lined up quite right. With we might need a review of where second and third planes actually change now because of puberty onset of
Montessori.
Well, we can base it on the teeth, and I honestly don't know how the teeth thing works with puberty, but certainly if we looked at adolescence now, the definition of adolescence is the onset of puberty.
Yeah, which is way early now,
economic
right?
independence, yeah. And so actually adolescence is this massive period of your life that starts earlier and earlier.
Wait, do you think it starts earlier and finishes earlier, or it starts earlier and takes longer?
Later. Because
Starts
depending on
early
how
and
you
finishes
define
later, so it's bigger.
it depends how you define it. It is my definition that I've picked up from a few researchers and commentators is that it finishes with economic independence.
Right.
And so that can be mid-20s, and of course with what we know about them, mid to late 20s. Yeah, sure. And then of course with brain development, what we know about that now is that that's really around 24, isn't it?
Depends on the gender, but yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool. So really, but if we look at that other end of it, we've got adolescent tendencies happening in the 9 to 12 classrooms. Everyone knows that, and so I wonder if we need to not just know that, but we need to acknowledge that, and we need to make some adjustments to how we do things. But again, we'll save that for the podcast.
Yeah, I know, because that's a whole that's a paradigm shift, in
Yeah,
reorganising the age groups. But very.
Well, what would
interesting.
Maria Montessori do? That's the question I always think: is what would she do and think now? And
she would think that she's given us a lot, and we should then
Well,
make our own decisions from there.
I'm done.
Come on now.
What do you want? Yeah. So.
So you've gone to the Adelaide. No, so now you're in Auckland. Did you say where you live in
Right.
Auckland?
So I said I lived on a boat.
Yeah.
So I live on a boat right across the harbour, from
The wet road.
The wet road, big wide wet road that is between where my boat is and central Auckland. So when I look out the back of my boat, I see the skyscrapers and the pretty lights and the Sky Tower, and that's a great thing. And so I'm sort of in central Auckland, but not really, and then working up in the North Shore. So to round back on how I ended up there was that the school, we just started working more and more together last year online, and then so it was like, well, come to Auckland and work for us, lead the school, be the principal.
So you're teaching there as well?
Yeah. So it's a small school, so I'm teaching, and I'm called the consulting principal. Mm-hmm. So I'm in that consultant role, but as the principal, so that kind of also that buck stops here kind of role for the school, and then developing things like the compliance with government regulations, because it's a new school, so it has to go through a lot of that stuff. So working for the little school in Auckland, helping them set up their systems, their vision statements, their kind of school purpose, grow the role. So there's a bunch of stuff, and I'm loving it. I mean, it's just been hands down my favourite Montessori job of all, I think.
Apart from that 6 months when we're in the same class.
That was epic. Yeah. That was key. And I think, actually, what I'd caution that and say it's been my favourite start to a year.
Yeah.
And that's because
we're only in the end of term 1,
yeah,
right?
So we've really just started. We're a quarter of the way through the year.
Yeah.
And every single year that I've started in any teaching job, I've never really enjoyed the first couple of weeks until you get into some rhythms. And even in all my Montessori work, even at this school and up at adolescent program, even though we go on the Odyssey.
Yeah. You should probably say what the Odyssey is. Does everyone have that, or is that an us thing?
Say that again.
Is Odyssey like a worldwide Montessori thing, or is that
I'd say adolescent practitioners would have heard of it. My understanding is it was a concept started by the Schaefer, Larry and Pat Schaefer, who are they're big in the elementary but also have adolescent programs, and they proposed this idea of start the year with the adolescents by taking them out of town, going on a massive journey with them where they have to learn to live together, they have to cook for each other, they have to deal with each other's problems, they have to deal with their own problems, and just mush them all together and form community based on that.
So how long does it take?
Their one was 2 full weeks, I believe. The one at Waiora is about 10 days.
Yeah. And that's all the teachers, all the students are together in one spot?
Various models. So we talked about the fact that at Waiora it's about a 10-day journey. At my current school, we didn't do Odyssey this year actually. And that was partly why I really enjoyed the start of this year, is because it was just less to organise.
But it's a lot of work,
yeah,
right?
It's a huge amount of work. And also, I mean, you know what it's like when you take kids away. It's a brilliant thing, but there are some downsides. Mm-hmm. There are some kids who have high levels of homesickness and anxiety about being away generally, and I think that's okay to a point.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of, what are we really forcing on these children in order to build a community? If you get it right, and everyone has a little bit of challenge, but then gets over it as a community and pats each other on the back and says, look, I'm a stronger person because of what I've just experienced with these people.
But how hard do you push to get there?
But I've observed that it's the ones who are very confident and very resilient already, they have the best time on those kinds of experiences. So I think there's just a bit of a question mark about the wisdom of upping sticks and taking everyone away.
And what about doing it at the beginning of the year when some of them are new to the school, like they're a new cohort, a whole third of them haven't been in the adolescent program yet?
Again, it works brilliantly for some.
Yeah.
So for those ones, it is absolute gem because they have such a concentrated period of time where they are putting themselves on show to these new people, these older people, where they are forming those kind of bonds, where they are having shared experiences with these people who are all new actually, because they've just had the summer, and everyone's kind of an inch taller and a bit hairier and a bit smellier, and they are to do that in a shared way and to be able to refer to that. Remember that time that we were climbing that rock, or that someone spewed toothpaste out of their nose when we were all brushing our teeth. All of those things are really, really key. And so the new ones who are ready for it, just absolutely fly. Yeah, it's just the ones who aren't ready. Yeah. And it's just a perennial issue in education, is readiness, isn't it? And how much you push and how much you let people not be ready.
But I feel like you lose a lot by not doing it at the beginning of the year, because our 9 to 12 camp was at the end of the year, and you go through this huge experience together, new friendships that you wouldn't have necessarily thought were going to work come together, and there's all that growth and bonding, and you do all this kind of work that refers to the cosmic curriculum, so then you could come back and explore all the fundamental human needs stuff, so much more, and then it's the summer holidays.
Yes.
And it's like you've wasted all of that input, and you lose a third of your cohort, and a third come in and they're nervous again, and it just felt like that's why we moved it to the beginning of the year, because it felt like we weren't getting a full value out of it. So at least you've got it in a place where for those that it does work, you've got value from it.
I think at White Order we always found that on balance it was worth it, but it certainly was nice to not do it this year. To just actually, what we did is we just started the year with a bunch of games and activities, and lots of kind of reflection on how the community was building itself, and chats about that, and routines, and getting into that, and allowing the brand new kids to just get used to the space and each other, and I think it worked really well for them. I would still like to take them away. I think Odyssey would still be really neat for them, but certainly this year it was also great to be, I don't know, having all the conversations with the staff about what we're doing this year, what it really means. We set it all up before the summer, as you do, but then you always have to have those conversations about what it means. Like what when we say we're doing community meeting on Friday at 11 o'clock, what does it actually look like? And so we could have all those conversations in real time. We weren't distracted by this other thing, and we could just prototype on the go and just refine out how we do school. And that was needed this year because it was a new site. I was new, there was another new staff member, there was a bunch of new students. So I think this year's model was really, really great. And I just loved, I don't know, having these short sessions of excitement with the people that I'm working with, including the students, but then also be able to go home at the end of the day, defrag and decompress, and then come back and do it again the next day. Which is something teachers are not actually very good at doing, like leaving their work at work. Yeah, that's right. So the length of, so there's so many things, and because it's an independent school, we can do it however we want. And so there's all these things that come up about length of school day.
Because you're not bound by that, so you could have 3-hour cycles and be okay with it. Whereas we had to shorten our days because of government regulations. That's was a big issue, but you don't have to do any of that.
No, we can really set it up the way we want, and we can have students working, they can work in our campus, or they can be working and learning in different places around the community. We can form alliances with businesses in the local area to have students working in there doing work experience. We can, I don't know, play around with things like microeconomy, where generally when a student earns money during microeconomy, the money then goes back into the community itself.
And they're good with that, right? Or no, they feel like it should be theirs.
Well, it's interesting. I'd actually asked, this isn't, you don't have to be an independent school to mess around with this stuff. We did try it up at White Order, and generally the students did want the money to go back into the community. But we're just putting a big question mark over there and kind of going, what would it be like to actually base your own economy at your school? So we all have an economy, right? We all have a way of earning money, and we've got to pay bills and all that sort of stuff. So what if we started that when they were 12 and gave them the opportunity to just practice their own personal entrepreneurship within the framework of a Montessori adolescent community, where everything's got to be ethical, where we think about accounting, and we link it to our maths and everything like that.
But it's their business.
But it's literally their business. And so, and then to take that further and go, instead of having the formal qualification that your country has, in our case it's called NCEA, right? National Certificate of Educational Achievement. Instead of making that the primary thing that older adolescents focus on in a Montessori school, we say, what about you just start with a really amazing LinkedIn profile? And we're not actually doing that, but the idea of having a profile and a portfolio that could actually be hosted by LinkedIn, literally.
Yeah.
But we probably won't go for that because of privacy issues. But making that the core of your schoolwork, and everything you do becomes an artifact, a link into this profile. And you sort of project forward to a student who's, say, 19 or 20 and go, right, what is going to be the most valuable thing to rock up to the institution you want to go and do your tertiary studies with, or an employer, or a funder, and what is it that you want to be able to present at that point? And in some pathways, the best thing to present at that point is the traditional educational achievement certificate. But in New Zealand anyway, if you're 20 and you don't have it, you can still go to university anyway. So what if you had at 20, you had this incredible LinkedIn profile or similar that showed that you had delivered speeches and organised events and travelled and reflected on all of that and created a whole lot of artwork and built things and helped people and connected with people, and that was all housed in this kind of profile. We are starting to think perhaps that's actually a better
than the piece of paper from the exam.
Yeah.
Can you do both though? Is like one so time consuming that you couldn't do the other at the same time?
We can do both. Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, we're just I'm really enjoying being able to think very differently about how we do the senior program, and I think that's probably why I've enjoyed the start of this year so much, is because we have like all our conversations in the staff room are about education. You know, I think back to my previous staff rooms, and they were generally about, I don't know, what you did on the weekend or whatever. You know, like the level of pedagogical sort of back and forth in the current school is just so much higher than I've ever had before. Because we're young, we're fresh, we have to do that. It's so important that we get this right. We don't have 10, 15 years of being a school to fall back on.
Yeah.
If we don't get this right, we'll fall over and we won't be a school. So that's really cool. So hopefully I'm adding some value as this sort of consultancy thing to that school. And because it finishes in a few months.
Oh, right. This is not a permanent position.
No.
Right.
And so I'll be back in Wellington. And that's great because I don't want to live in Auckland.
Yeah.
I mean, I have this house down here and my wife is here.
So you're sailing back?
No, my little boat wouldn't get that far. It would probably take about 3 months. Yeah, of weather windows, because you wouldn't want to be in the too rough. No, I think I'm going to put it on a truck. Actually, no, that's not quite right. No, we're going to leave it in Auckland. But eventually, if we want to keep it, we'll have to truck it down here. But yeah. So, yeah.
So where from there? Like originally you were going to go to Europe and try your hand or whatever, but you've settled here a bit now.
Definitely going to stay in New Zealand. Absolutely. Not thinking of travelling to work.
But not long term? Like you might bounce around consulting? Nothing like that?
Not in the next couple of years, no. So once COVID settles down and the world comes back to normal, if that ever happens, then look at that, definitely. I mean, that would be my ideal, for sure. Professionally, my absolute ideal would be to just drop into a school for a week, help them out, fly off to another school, wheel back to the first school after a wee while, and just have a number of schools that I just kind of worked with and helped out. So we'll see.
So that's a long-term plan?
Yeah, absolutely. Because this consultancy thing, it just suits me so much because I can't really keep my feet on the ground for too long. I think now that I'm out of schools, it's going to be really, out of full-time teaching role, it's really, really hard to go back because I just get too distracted and too excited by other things.
But you're good at it too because you can say things that people don't want to hear in a way that doesn't make them feel insulted by that, and so you can challenge them to kind of really look at their practice without feeling judged by it. So that's, I think
because I've been there. I mean, I've been the world's worst teacher. And I'm by no means the world's best teacher. In fact, I'm far from it. I think that is probably my strength, is that I know that actually as a teacher, I needed to step back and actually let other people who are more organised get on and be teachers. And I'm just, but because I did it for so long, I can look back in and go, but what about this sort of thing? And I know what it feels like when a classroom works really well. I think that's the thing. How it looks and feels is really, really crucial, and I think that's what the vision that we've always got to have is that the classroom feels it is safe and it feels joyful, and they're doing work that is connecting them to the bigger picture. Yeah, and I mean, I would love that. I would love to just connect with teachers who just need a bit of input, especially in the adolescent realm. I think it was really, really successful working with the teacher in Auckland last year on Zoom.
I was just going to ask that. Does it have to be in person? Like, is it something you think you could do?
Absolutely. Like I found working with students online quite challenging.
Yeah.
And I'm not really that interested in that. Although I did do a lot of little stories and presentations and things that was quite cool. So making little videos and then sending them to the students up in Auckland was good. But certainly working with the teacher, the lead teacher at that school, that was incredibly effective working distance. I think that was actually great. And it means, I don't know, it's quite nice, isn't it? Because you can just go, right, the meeting's over, close the laptop. There's not all those distractions of those kind of the small talk around the office and things. You can just be exactly on time. You can have the meeting for the set amount of time and then just stop. So I think the remote thing works quite well for some things.
Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, of course, Montessori is great for travel.
Yeah.
If you think about it. So that was another aspect of why I've loved it so much is, so there was the New York trip, lots of trips around New Zealand, Australia. So that was another big thing, because meeting in the middle with the adolescents, the version of our conference.
So that's New Zealand and
Australia, Southeast Asia, bit of the Pacific, and so there's that, and then been to a couple of congresses, Sydney, a long time ago, like literally 2005, I think was Sydney.
Well, they're only over 4 years, aren't they?
Yeah, and that was, because it was close. And then I went to Prague, and that's where I saw you, of course.
Yes.
And you were launching your book, and
not launching
your
it
book.
yet. No, I was, but I hadn't fully got it published yet. So that's what I was kind of trying to introduce it to people and see whether there really was interest in it, because it was nearly written and I was figuring out how to publish it then.
Cool.
Yeah.
And how's it going?
Yeah, really good now. It's around and about places. People are sending me like work they're doing, pictures of it and stuff. I've met a lot of great people through the kind of community that's built up around it. So that's super cool.
But that's great, and so people are obviously using it.
Yeah, and I've got 2 more on, because that one was only ever meant to be like a third of the album, and so it's a handwork album, but it's the work of wool. It's just about wool, but it relates to the cosmic curriculum. But I'm also doing one on sewing with the seeds, and I'm doing carving and carrying, which is like the paper making, quills, basketry, clay, all of the harder materials. If I can ever find time to actually, you get all the lessons written and the photos taken and get it put together. But that's kind of my current big focus is getting more variety of handwork lessons out there.
Fantastic. Yeah. We should get it into adolescent communities.
I think it would feed in perfectly.
I know. And so we need to do that, and because one thing I've definitely seen is the need for working with the hands, with the adolescents. As much as they might tell you they don't want to, and I won't say they all love it, but it's got that aspect of, it's the microeconomy sort of making things to sell aspect, but I think it's the peace maybe that comes with it, the slowing down the pace, the antidote to everything being so fast is to actually just do something by hand, and then that idea of it being solid and lasting and there forever, and
there are again, I could talk for ages about there's so many reasons, but it's like all these fidget toys that are coming out now, and all these cheap plastic fidget toys that people are just fiddling with to no end apart from keeping their hands busy. What if they were just like stitching a basket together or knitting during that time, and it was contributing to their community because they need more blankets or their microeconomy. But I think it feeds in really well because they're learning the skills at elementary that they will then use for their microeconomy, but they don't have to learn the skill to make the product, So all they're focusing on is actually building that business rather than the basic skills.
I think that's really key, because I imagine I have kids who are into those fidgets, and they would, if I said, "Here's learn how to sew a button on," they would laugh at me. But if they had, like you say, if they had their foundation skills, then there's that. It's like my mother always used to doodle. She would never do any art, but she would just doodle while she was on the phone. And it was that kind of that nice meditative thing that you're doing with your hand, but in your case it's making something valuable as well.
Yeah. And it's training your hands for other things, but
Yeah.
I mean, we could go on tangents on this one
Yeah,
forever.
podcast 4.
Yeah, we've got a whole series. All right, well, we are losing our sunlight because it is getting towards winter, unfortunately. But I've really enjoyed our chat. We will do this again sometime.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming and joining me today.
Thank you, Carol.
And thank you, viewers around the world.
See you online.
Okay, goodbye.